Imagine music so profound, so utterly universal, that humanity chose to send it on a satellite into deep space as our cosmic greeting card. That's the enduring legacy of Johann Sebastian Bach, whose Brandenburg Concerto No. 2 is currently hurtling beyond our solar system, echoing his genius across the stars. Welcome, history buffs, to another episode of Cast the Past, where we unearth the lives of monumental figures like Bach, exploring how their world-changing contributions still resonate today, from concert halls to the very edge of the universe. Prepare to be captivated by the unparalleled master of the Baroque era, and if you're ready to journey through time with us, please subscribe and give this video a like. The Bach Dynasty and an Orphan's Beginning. Life in 17th century Germany was, however, a fragile affair. The shadow of the 30 Years' War still loomed, and mortality was an ever-present houseguest. Sebastian's world was irrevocably shattered before he reached the age of 10. First, his mother, Elizabeth, passed away. Within a year, his father, Johann Ambrosius, followed her, leaving the young boy an orphan. This profound loss, this sudden, stark silence in a life previously filled with familial music, would become a crucible for the composer's soul. His music, so often reaching for a divine order, for a solace beyond the grasp of earthly suffering, is perhaps rooted in this primal experience of grief. He was taken in by his eldest brother, Johann Christoph, an organist in the nearby town of Ohrdruf. It was under his brother's roof that Sebastian's formal musical education truly began. Christoph was a student of the great Johann Pachelbel, and he passed on the rigorous traditions of the South German organ school. The young Bach was an insatiable student, possessing a ferocious appetite for knowledge and a stubborn, almost defiant determination. A famous, though perhaps apocryphal story illustrates this perfectly. His brother kept a prized manuscript of works by contemporary masters like Froberger, Kerll, and Pachelbel locked away in a cabinet. Believing Sebastian was not yet ready for such complex music, he forbade him from studying it. But Sebastian would not be denied. For 6 months, on moonlit nights when the house was asleep, he would pull the manuscript through the cabinet's lattice doors, painstakingly copying every note by the faint light. This clandestine act was more than youthful rebellion. It was the first testament to a lifelong conviction that music was a knowledge to be pursued relentlessly, a divine science whose secrets must be unlocked. When his brother discovered the finished copy, he confiscated it, an act of stern pedagogy that must have stung the young prodigy. Yet the music was already inside him. The seeds of counterpoint, of harmonic complexity, and of virtuosic keyboard technique were sown, not in a formal lesson, but in the quiet rebellion of a determined orphan under the moon. The Journeyman years, Arnstadt and the walk to Lübeck. The most legendary event of his Arnstadt tenure, however, was an act of audacious pilgrimage. In the winter of 1705, Bach became obsessed with the music of Dieterich Buxtehude, the aging master of the North German organ school, whose post at the Marienkirche in Lübeck was the most prestigious in the German-speaking world. Buxtehude's Abendmusiken, or evening concerts, were famous throughout the land. Bach requested a 4-week leave of absence from his duties in Arnstadt to go and hear him. Then he did the unthinkable. He walked. He set out on foot across more than 250 miles of harsh, winter-bound German countryside, a journey that would have taken weeks. This was no casual trip. It was a quest. He was a pilgrim traveling to the shrine of a musical saint, driven by an unquenchable thirst to learn from the best. The experience was transformative. In Lübeck, he heard music of a scale and complexity he had only dreamed of. Buxtehude's virtuosic pedal work, his dramatic flair, and his improvisational genius left an indelible mark on the young composer. His 4-week leave stretched into nearly 4 months. When he finally returned to Arnstadt, he was a changed musician, brimming with new, foreign ideas. He was also in a great deal of trouble. The church consistory summoned him to answer for his extended absence and for his increasingly bizarre musical innovations. He was accused of playing for too long, of introducing strange variations into the hymns, and of making many curious embellishments which mixed in foreign tones, and which confused the congregation. Bach's defense was likely a mixture of youthful arrogance and genuine bewilderment that they could not appreciate the musical revelations he had brought back. The incident at Arnstadt established a pattern for his early career, a genius straining against the confines of provincial expectation, a man whose artistic vision was constantly outpacing the comprehension of his patrons and employers. The long walk to Lübeck was over, but his journey to find a place that could contain his immense talent had only just begun. A Storm in Mülhausen, Early Cantatas and Controversy. However, Mülhausen was not the artistic haven he had hoped for. The city was embroiled in a fierce theological dispute between two factions of Lutheranism, the Orthodox Lutherans and the Pietists. The Pietists, led by the deacon at Bach's own church, advocated for a simpler, more austere form of worship. They believed that complex, elaborate music was a worldly distraction from true devotion. For a composer like Bach, who believed that even the most complex music was a form of prayer and an offering for the glory of God alone, this was anathema. He saw music not as a distraction from faith, but as its most potent expression, a direct line to the divine. He found himself caught in the crossfire of this religious schism, his artistic vision fundamentally at odds with the prevailing ideology of his superiors. He had grand plans for the renovation of the St. Blaise organ and for the establishment of a well-regulated church music program, but he quickly realized his ambitions would be stifled by the Pietist-dominated council. Frustrated and disillusioned, Bach made a decisive move. After only a year in Mülhausen, he sought a new position. In a lengthy and remarkably forthright letter of resignation, he explained his reasoning to the town council. He stated that his ultimate goal was to create a well-regulated church music to the glory of God, but that this was impossible in the current climate of theological strife and with the limited resources provided. He spoke of the hindrance and vexation he experienced, clear indicators of his artistic and spiritual suffocation. It was a bold and risky move for a young musician with a new family to support, but it was a testament to his unwavering artistic integrity. He would not compromise his vision. He would not write simple music when his soul demanded complexity. He was in search of a patron who understood that a glorious God deserved glorious music. That search would lead him to the court of Weimar. The Weimar court. Organ virtuoso and concertmaster. During his time in Weimar, Bach's reputation as the greatest organist in Germany was solidified. Stories of his unparalleled skill became legendary. It was said that his feet flew across the pedalboard with such speed and precision that they seemed to be a third and fourth hand, executing passages that other organists would struggle to play with their fingers alone. His ability to improvise complex, multi-voiced fugues on the spot was considered almost supernatural. A contemporary, upon hearing Bach play, wrote that he seemed to have his whole body and soul in the music. In 1714, his status at court was elevated to Concertmeister, or concertmaster. This promotion came with new responsibilities. He was now required to compose a new church cantata every 4 weeks. This demand pushed him to develop a systematic approach to composition, honing his skills in writing for voice and orchestra, and laying the groundwork for the monumental cantata cycles he would later produce in Leipzig. Cantatas from this period, like Ich hatte viel Bekümmernis, I Had Much Grief, show a deepening psychological and emotional complexity, seamlessly blending Italian instrumental styles with German contrapuntal rigor. Yet, even in this seemingly ideal environment, Bach's stubborn personality and ambition would eventually lead to conflict. The political situation at the Weimar court was tense, with the two co-reigning dukes often at odds. When the court's elder Kapellmeister, or music director, died in 1716, Bach, as the accomplished and ambitious concertmaster, fully expected to be promoted. But for political reasons, the post was given to a less talented, mediocre musician. For Bach, this was an unforgivable slight, a sign that his genius was once again being undervalued. When an attractive offer arrived from the court of Prince Leopold of Anhalt-Cöthen, Bach accepted it without hesitation. However, Duke Wilhelm Ernst, incensed at his star musician's attempt to leave, refused to accept his resignation. When Bach pressed the issue, the Duke had him arrested and thrown in jail. For nearly a month, Johann Sebastian Bach, the greatest organist of his age, sat in a prison cell. Finally, on December 2, 1717, the Duke relented, releasing him with an unfavorable discharge. Bach was free to go, leaving Weimar under a cloud of disgrace, but heading towards one of the most brilliant and productive periods of his entire career: the Orgelbüchlein and the Passion for the Chorale. Each piece in the Orgelbüchlein is a miniature masterpiece of musical poetry. Bach takes the simple, familiar melody of a Lutheran hymn, the chorale, and embeds it within a complex web of counterpoint. But this is not merely a technical exercise, it is an act of musical exegesis, a sermon in sound. The surrounding musical material is never arbitrary, it is always derived from the text of the hymn, illustrating its imagery and emotional content with astonishing vividness. In O Lamm Gottes unschuldig, O Innocent Lamb of God, the sighing, chromatic lines evoke the suffering of Christ. In Durch Adams Fall ist ganz verderbt, through Adam's fall is all corrupt, the jarring, dissonant fall of the bass line in the pedals is a literal depiction of the fall of man. In dir ist Freude, in thee is joy, the music erupts in an ecstatic cascade of jubilant motifs. Bach created a unique musical language, a vocabulary of motifs and textures that directly corresponded to the theological concepts of the texts he was setting. The Orgelbüchlein was also revolutionary in its treatment of the organ pedals. Before Bach, the pedals were often used for simple, long-held bass notes. Bach, however, treated the pedal board as a fully independent voice, demanding a level of virtuosity from the feet that was entirely unprecedented. He integrated the chorale melody into a dense four-part polyphonic texture, with each hand and both feet responsible for a separate melodic line. This created a richness and complexity that transformed the chorale prelude from a simple liturgical introduction into a profound and self-contained work of art. The collection served as a comprehensive encyclopedia of compositional techniques for his students, but it was much more than a textbook. It was Bach's personal testament to the power of the Lutheran chorale, the musical bedrock of his faith. It was a demonstration that within these simple, ancient melodies, an entire universe of spiritual and emotional meaning could be found, waiting to be unlocked by the hand of a master. A Prince's Favor, the Cöthen Years and Secular Masterpieces. The Cöthen Orchestra was an elite ensemble, composed of some of the finest musicians in Germany. Bach was in his element, directing from the harpsichord or playing first violin. Freed from the constraints of church committees and theological disputes, he produced a stunning array of secular masterpieces. This is the era of the sonatas and partitas for solo violin, 6 works of staggering technical and emotional depth that pushed the instrument to its absolute limits. The famous Chaconne from the partita in D minor, a single movement lasting nearly 15 minutes, is a universe of variations built upon a simple bass line, a work of such profound genius that it is often considered the summit of all solo violin music. He also composed the 6 suites for solo cello, works that transformed an instrument previously relegated to the bass line into a vehicle for sublime melody and complex polyphony. For the keyboard, he wrote the Chromatic Fantasia and Fugue, the English suites, and the French suites, all staples of the repertoire to this day. This idyllic period was tragically interrupted in 1720. While traveling with Prince Leopold, Bach returned home to a devastating blow. His wife, Maria Barbara, had died suddenly and been buried a week earlier. He was now a widower with 4 young children. This personal tragedy cast a long shadow over the final years in Cöthen. A year later, in 1721, he remarried. His new wife, Anna Magdalena Wilke, was a gifted young soprano at the court. She would become his lifelong companion, a dedicated partner who assisted him by copying out his scores, and a mother to his children. However, Bach's professional circumstances were also changing. Prince Leopold married a princess who reportedly had little interest in music, and the court's musical budget was subsequently reduced. With his growing family to support and his artistic opportunities at court diminishing, Bach began to look elsewhere. He sought a position that offered both financial security and a robust musical environment for the education of his sons, several of whom were already showing immense musical promise. That search would lead him to the bustling commercial and academic city of Leipzig, and to the most demanding, prestigious, and ultimately frustrating job of his career: the Brandenburg Concertos, a monument to the concerto grosso. The sheer variety is breathtaking. The first concerto is the most orchestral, adding the noble sounds of 2 horns to the strings and woodwinds. The second concerto is famous for its fiendishly difficult solo trumpet part, which soars into a clarino register previously unheard of, pitted against the gentler tones of the recorder, oboe, and violin. The third concerto is a tour de force for strings alone, dividing the ensemble into 3 groups of 3, creating a rich, pulsating texture of interwoven lines. The fourth concerto features a concertino group of violin and 2 fiati d'eco, likely recorders, in a display of sparkling virtuosity. The fifth concerto is revolutionary. Here, Bach takes the harpsichord, an instrument traditionally used for continuo accompaniment, and thrusts it into the spotlight as a soloist. The concerto culminates in an astonishingly long and brilliant solo cadenza for the harpsichord, effectively inventing the keyboard concerto as we know it. Finally, the sixth concerto creates a uniquely dark and mellow sound world by omitting the violins entirely, instead featuring the lower-timbered violas and violas da gamba. Beyond the inventive instrumentation, the Brandenburg Concertos showcase Bach's absolute mastery of musical architecture. He absorbed the Italian concerto style of composers like Vivaldi, with its clear alternation between the full orchestra, ripieno, and the soloists, concertino, and then elevated it to a new level of contrapuntal complexity. Within the Italianate forms, he weaves a dense tapestry of polyphony, where every instrumental line is a melody in its own right, and the distinction between soloist and accompaniment often blurs into a seamless whole. The concertos are a perfect synthesis of Italian grace, French dance rhythms, and German intellectual rigor. They are a celebration of the joy of instrumental music, filled with infectious energy, rhythmic vitality, and an inexhaustible wellspring of melodic invention. Though they may have languished unplayed in the Margrave's library, they stand today as one of the supreme achievements of the Baroque era, a monument to Bach's boundless imagination and his ability to transform established forms into something entirely new. The Well-Tempered Clavier, a revolution in harmony. The very title, well-tempered, points to its groundbreaking nature. In Bach's time, keyboard instruments were tuned using various systems of temperament, most of which resulted in some keys sounding beautifully in tune, while others were dissonant and unusable. This limited the keys in which a composer could write. A well-tempered tuning system was a new method of compromise, slightly adjusting the intervals so that all 24 keys were musically viable, each with its own subtle, unique character. Bach was not the inventor of this concept, but the well-tempered clavier was its most powerful and persuasive advocate. By providing a masterpiece in every single key, he demonstrated conclusively the immense expressive potential that this new harmonic universe unlocked. He threw open the doors to the entire landscape of tonality, making it possible for composers to modulate freely from one key to another, a fundamental principle of music from the classical era to the present day. Every composer from Mozart and Beethoven to Chopin and Shostakovich would study this work as their Bible. The collection is a universe in miniature. Each prelude explores a specific technical or expressive idea. The rippling arpeggios of the C major, the poignant lyricism of the C-sharp minor, the toccata-like brilliance of the D major. The preludes serve as introductions, setting the emotional stage for the fugues that follow. And it is in the fugues that Bach's true genius for counterpoint is revealed. A fugue is a complex polyphonic form in which a short melodic idea, the subject, is introduced by one voice and then successively taken up by others, woven together in an intricate and continuous tapestry. Bach's fugues are miracles of intellectual and artistic construction. They range from tightly controlled academic three-part fugues to massive, complex five-part structures. Yet they are never merely academic. Each fugue is a drama, a conversation between independent melodic lines that is by turns playful, tragic, serene, and majestic. The Well-Tempered Clavier, he would later compile a second volume in Leipzig, is the definitive codification of the tonal system and the art of the fugue, an Everest of the keyboard repertoire that has challenged and inspired musicians for centuries. Leipzig, the Thomas Cantor and a city's demands. The reality of the job was a constant struggle. The resources were often inadequate. The choir boys he was given were of mixed ability. The instrumentalists were a combination of town musicians and university students, and the council consistently denied his requests for more funding and better performers. Bach, the proud and uncompromising artist, found himself in a perpetual battle with his employers. He complained of the strange and wonderfully thievish nature of the city's authorities, and the vexation, envy, and persecution he had to endure. He was an artist of the highest order, trapped in the machinery of civic administration. His relationship with the school's rector, Johann August Ernesti, was particularly poisonous, devolving into a bitter public dispute over the right to appoint student prefects. These conflicts were not just about administrative trifles. They represented a fundamental clash of worldviews. Bach saw his music as a direct offering to God, a form of worship that demanded the highest possible standard of excellence. The council, on the other hand, often saw it as a functional part of the liturgy, a line item on a budget that needed to be kept in check. Despite these endless frustrations, the first years in Leipzig were a period of almost superhuman productivity. Bach composed at a relentless pace, a craftsman delivering his weekly masterpiece against impossible deadlines. In his first few years alone, he composed at least 3 complete annual cycles of church cantatas, around 150 works, each a complex piece of sacred drama lasting 20 to 30 minutes. This astonishing output was not the work of a man who was merely settling. It was the work of a composer at the absolute peak of his powers, pouring his genius into the creation of a well-regulated church music that he had dreamed of since his youth. The cantatas, passions, and masses he wrote in Leipzig were the culmination of his life's work as a church musician. He may have been the council's third choice, but in the sacred spaces of St. Thomas and St. Nicholas, he would create a musical universe that would far outlast the petty squabbles of his worldly employers. The cantata cycle, a universe of sacred music. The sheer logistical effort required to produce this music on a weekly basis is mind-boggling. Bach had to compose the score, have the individual parts copied out for each musician, rehearse the choir, often unruly schoolboys, and the orchestra, and then direct the performance, all while fulfilling his other teaching and administrative duties. He was a craftsman working under constant pressure, yet the music shows no signs of haste. Instead, it reveals a composer in absolute command of his materials, able to deploy a vast arsenal of musical techniques to illuminate the sacred text. His use of instrumentation is masterful and symbolic. He uses trumpets and drums for festive occasions like Christmas and Easter, mournful oboes and recorders for moments of penitence and grief, and the hunting horn to evoke pastoral or noble themes. The musical language is deeply rooted in the Lutheran tradition of musical rhetorical figures, where specific melodic and rhythmic gestures are used to represent words and ideas like joy, sorrow, sin, and redemption. Within these cycles, we find some of his most beloved and enduring works. There is the majestic opening chorus of Wachet auf, ruft uns die Stimme. Sleepers awake, the voice is calling, with its glorious soaring violin melody intertwined with the solid chorale tune in the horns. There is the profound intimacy of Ich habe genug, I have enough, a solo cantata for bass voice that expresses a world-weary longing for death and the release of the spirit. And there is the sheer unbridled joy of Ein feste Burg ist unser Gott, a powerful and defiant setting of Martin Luther's great hymn. Listening to the cantatas is to experience the entire spectrum of human and divine emotion, from the darkest despair to the most transcendent joy. They are a testament to a faith that was not abstract or remote, but deeply felt and lived. For Bach, this weekly labor was not a burden, but the fulfillment of his highest calling, to use his art to interpret the Word of God and bring his congregation closer to the divine. The St. John and St. Matthew Passions, the summit of sacred drama. The St. John Passion is the earlier of the two, and it is a work of breathtaking dramatic intensity. It is taut, urgent, and at times almost terrifying in its depiction of the crowd's fury. The focus is on the divine, majestic nature of Christ, who seems to move through the narrative with a sense of sovereign control, even in his suffering. The music is filled with vivid word painting and powerful, almost violent choral writing. The St. Matthew Passion, by contrast, is a work of far greater scale and emotional depth. Scored for 2 choirs and 2 orchestras, it is a vast, contemplative epic that emphasizes the human suffering of Jesus. The drama is enriched by the inclusion of newly written poetic texts for the arias and choruses, which allow for moments of profound personal reflection. Arias like the alto's Erbarme dich, Have Mercy, with its heart-rending violin solo, are among the most deeply moving expressions of grief and repentance in all of music. The work is a masterpiece of architectural symmetry and emotional pacing, guiding the listener on a spiritual journey from the betrayal in the Garden of Gethsemane to the final, sorrowful entombment. Performing these works was a massive undertaking, pushing the musical resources of Leipzig to their absolute limit. The St. Matthew Passion, in particular, with its double choir and double orchestra setup, must have been an overwhelming experience in the Gothic space of St. Thomas Church. For Bach, these passions were the ultimate fulfillment of his duty as Thomas Cantor. They were not entertainments, but profound acts of worship designed to confront the congregation with the central mystery of their faith. After Bach's death, these colossal works fell into silence for nearly a century, deemed too complex and too intensely emotional for the changing tastes of the Enlightenment. It was only with their revival in the 19th century that the world began to rediscover the sheer scale of Bach's genius. Today, the Passions stand as timeless monuments of faith and art, works that continue to speak to audiences of all beliefs with their universal message of suffering, compassion, and hope. The Collegium Musicum and the Coffeehouse Concerts. The concerts at Zimmermann's were a far cry from the solemnity of St. Thomas Church. The atmosphere was convivial and informal. Here, Bach could present instrumental music, much of it composed during his happier years in Cöthen, to an appreciative public audience. He wrote numerous concertos for 1, 2, 3, and even 4 harpsichords, which he would have performed with his talented sons and students. These works, often arrangements of his earlier violin or oboe concertos, are filled with rhythmic drive and brilliant contrapuntal interplay, testaments to the joy of collaborative music making. He also composed many secular cantatas, or drama per musica, for various civic and university occasions. These were often humorous or celebratory works, such as the famous Coffee Cantata, a charming one-act comic opera about a young woman's addiction to the fashionable new beverage, or the Peasant Cantata, a rustic comedy full of folk-like melodies. These pieces reveal a side of Bach often overlooked, a man with a sense of humor and a keen appreciation for the worldly pleasures of life. Directing the Collegium Musicum gave Bach a new lease on his artistic life in Leipzig. It provided him with a capable and enthusiastic ensemble free from the administrative headaches of his church duties. It allowed him to stay connected with the latest musical trends from Italy and France, and to present his own secular compositions to a paying public. This period also saw him cultivate his connections with the court in Dresden, the capital of Saxony, which boasted a far more glamorous and well-funded musical establishment than Leipzig. In 1733, he presented parts of what would later become his Mass in B minor to the new elector, eventually securing the honorary title of Royal Polish and Electoral Saxon Court Composer. This title was not just a matter of prestige, it was a strategic move, giving him more leverage in his ongoing disputes with the authorities in Leipzig. The coffeehouse concerts and the Dresden connection show a pragmatic and worldly Bach, an artist finding creative new outlets for his genius beyond the confines of the Cantor's choir loft. The Art of Fugue, an unfinished testament. The entire work, lasting over an hour, is a monolithic exploration of a single, deceptively simple theme in D minor. From this one piece of musical DNA, Bach generates a breathtaking series of 14 fugues called contrapunctus and 4 canons, each one exploring a different contrapuntal technique. He systematically demonstrates every conceivable device for manipulating a fugal subject: inversion, turning it upside down, augmentation, slowing it down, and diminution, speeding it up. He writes mirror fugues, where the entire musical fabric is reflected as if in a mirror. He combines the original theme with new themes, weaving them together in double and triple fugues of ever-increasing complexity. It is the most rigorous and systematic demonstration of contrapuntal art ever composed. Bizarrely, Bach never specified the instrumentation. The work is written in open score, with each voice on its own staff, suggesting it was intended not for performance, but for study, as an abstract testament to the limitless possibilities of polyphony. The final fugue, Contrapunctus 14, is the most complex of all. It is a massive quadruple fugue, planned to combine 3 new subjects with the original main theme of the entire work. Bach introduces the first subject, then the second. Then, as the third subject, he introduces a new melody based on the musical notes B, A, C, H. In German notation, B flat is B and B natural is H. It is his musical signature, the composer himself entering his creation. He weaves these 3 themes together in a display of astonishing contrapuntal mastery. And then, at the very moment where the original main theme is due to enter, binding the entire work together, the music simply stops. The manuscript breaks off mid-measure. His son, Carl Philipp Emanuel, later added a note. At this point in the fugue, where the name BACH is introduced as a counter-subject, the composer died. While this is a romantic exaggeration, he died some months later, the image is overwhelmingly powerful. The Art of Fugue remains Bach's unfinished testament, a silent, profound monument to a lifetime spent exploring the outer limits of musical order and logic. the final years, blindness, and the musical offering. A remarkable event from this period provided the spark for one last great contrapuntal masterpiece. In 1747, he was invited to the court of Frederick the Great in Potsdam, where his son Carl Philipp Emanuel was employed as a court harpsichordist. The music-loving king, himself a skilled flutist and composer, was eager to meet the legendary Old Bach. During the visit, Frederick presented Bach with a long and complex musical theme of his own invention and challenged the old master to improvise a three-part fugue on it. Bach, of course, did so effortlessly. When the king then demanded a six-part fugue, Bach demurred, stating that such a complex theme required more preparation. But the challenge had been set. Upon his return to Leipzig, Bach became obsessed with the royal theme. He set to work not just on a six-part fugue, but on a whole collection of pieces based on the king's theme, canons, fugues, and a trio sonata, all demonstrating the theme's hidden potential with a level of genius that Frederick could never have imagined. He had the collection engraved and sent it to the king under the title Musikalisches Opfer, the musical offering. By 1749, Bach's eyesight, which had been poor for years, failed him completely. He was suffering from cataracts, and two botched operations by the traveling English oculist John Taylor left him totally blind and in excruciating pain. His final months were spent in darkness, but his musical mind remained as luminous as ever. Unable to write, he dictated his last composition, a chorale prelude on Wenn wir in höchsten Nöten sein, when we are in greatest need. As he revised it, he changed the title to Vor deinen Thron trete hiermit, Before your throne I now appear. It is a work of serene, otherworldly beauty, a final, peaceful farewell from a man who had spent his life in the service of his God and his art. On July 28, 1750, Johann Sebastian Bach died from complications following a stroke. He was buried in an unmarked grave in the cemetery of St. John's Church in Leipzig. The greatest musical mind of the era had fallen silent. Legacy: the Bach Revival and the Echoes of Eternity. The tide began to turn in the early 19th century. Composers of the Romantic era, searching for a deeper spiritual and national identity, began to unearth Germany's musical past. Beethoven deeply admired Bach, calling him the Urvater der Harmonie, the original father of harmony. But the true turning point came on March 11, 1829. On that day in Berlin, a 20-year-old Felix Mendelssohn, against considerable opposition, conducted the first performance of the St. Matthew Passion since Bach's death. The event was a sensation. The audience, accustomed to the elegant classicism of Haydn and Mozart, was overwhelmed by the power, drama, and profound spirituality of Bach's music. It was a revelation. The concert sparked what became known as the Bach Revival, a widespread movement to recover, publish, and perform Bach's forgotten masterpieces. Scholars began the monumental task of cataloging his works, and the Bach Gesellschaft was founded with the aim of publishing a complete edition of his known compositions, a project that would take 50 years to complete. Today, Johann Sebastian Bach's position in the musical pantheon is undisputed. He is not just a composer. He is a foundation. His work is the culmination of the entire Baroque era and the starting point for everything that followed. His mastery of counterpoint, his harmonic language, and his sense of architectural form have influenced virtually every composer since. His music possesses a unique duality. It is at once a product of rigorous intellectual logic and a vessel of the most profound human emotion. It is a testament to a worldview where science and faith, reason and spirituality were not opposed, but were two sides of the same coin, both paths to understanding the divine order of the universe. In the intricate web of his fugues and the soaring lines of his arias, we hear more than just music. We hear the echoes of a mind grappling with the greatest questions of existence, and finding in the harmonious resolution of dissonance a metaphor for faith, hope, and the enduring power of the human spirit.